The first of 7 visions. I was sleeping next to my wife in my home. It must have been close to 3 a.m. It was October of 1997. I began to feel a gentle presence around me that grew to be powerful enough to lift me out of bed. The best way to describe the presence, it was love and peace times 10,000. I was awake and aware of a misty brightness around me that was without question the Holy Spirit of God. The Spirit lifted me up and I began to rise up, noticing my wife at my left side and the bed and the walls around me, and suddenly up through the ceiling and past the trusses and up and away past the roof and quickly but gently into the night sky. The stars were there. I could see them through the mist and clouds. It was as if I was in an invisible airline jet looking down at the occasional lights of small towns and cities as I traveled eastward. How I know I was traveling east is something I cannot explain. The feeling of love and peace times 10,000 was constant during this entire time and throughout the entire vision. It was as if the Spirit of God was within me, above me, beside me, and beneath me all around. I traveled for it seemed about 20 minutes and then began to descend into a large city. The city was out east, maybe Philadelphia or New York or Boston. I'm not sure what city it was. Passing over a metropolis area and into an older business district, I then settled into a parking area and noticed my feet did not touch the ground. Hovering there, I began to notice a group of 10 young men, thugs, who were surrounding a beautiful younger woman, a professional who apparently worked very late and was making her way back to her car. She was not speaking, just clutching her purse and trying to stay in control. The men began to tear at her bag and pulled it away from her, manhandling her and threatening to rape her. It was then that one of them noticed me standing there about 75 feet away, watching and feeling that I would intervene. He came over, distracting the others from the young woman who had held on to her as they began to jeer at me. After he lit into me with a string of street expletives, he came at me as if to push me down. I then reached my left hand forward and placed my hand gently under his jaw, on his neck, and instantly he fell to the asphalt in a heap. One by one, they came with their insults and threats, and I repeated, placing my left hand into their necks until all 10 were in a heap on the parking lot in front of me. I looked over where the young lady had been captive, and she had restored her belongings, gathered them up, and ran from the scene. I noticed the feeling of love and peace times 10,000 had never left me, and had felt no fear as the young men approached me to try to do me harm. I felt neither brave nor heroic as I watched the woman escape, only peace and thanks she was now safe and on her way. I turned and began to walk. I walked for several blocks along the decrepit sidewalk on the right side of the street, and along came a bag lady with a knit hat on her head, muttering as she walked. She took no notice of me, as if she did not see me, but we were on the same sidewalk, approaching one another. I wondered then if I was invisible to her, but I think she had rather chosen to remain indifferent to me. I felt sorry for her. As I began to pass by her, passing on my left, I noticed my left hand lifting up gently, as if to gently touch her head. I wanted to feel this peace. I wanted her to feel this peace that I was feeling so wonderfully all throughout me. But my hand passed right on through, as if I were only a spirit, right through her head and her hat. I looked over my left shoulder as I passed by her and noticed suddenly she stopped still, as if she had realized something had happened to her. But almost as quickly as she stopped, she shook herself slightly and began muttering along again in the direction she had been going. I continued on walking about 7 to 12 inches above that sidewalk for several more blocks when I came upon an old and young group of street people. These people noticed me right away and began to come toward me. I immediately understood they were very poor and had somehow been displaced here with no relatives to care for them in the city. There were maybe 30 or 40 people. Some were sick. I felt so much love for them, and their faces showed me that they were appreciative of having me come. Unprompted, they just came one by one, and I gave them each a big hug. I felt the love and peace within and around me was passing into each of them. They were so happy and gentle. It was as if each of us understood at that moment we were all just supposed to enjoy the presence and power of God's love for us. Some of them were healed during this hug, but all of them received a wonderful moment of His presence. After each had been hugged and I gestured my love for them and silent goodbyes, I moved away from them, not hurried, just because it was time to move on. As I left them, I began to rise up again. Surrounded by the misty spiritual aura, I traveled through the city sky toward another part of the city. I saw the steeple of a church beneath me in the distance and began to drop down on an angle toward it. The black shingled roof had a very steep pitch, and I sunk into it and noticed I had entered at the pulpit end of the church. At an angle, I drifted down over the pulpit, then continuing over the pews, and then down through the foyer doors, where I stopped between the doors and of the foyer, now behind me, and the doors of the main entrance open to the street. Placed there, I was again hovering over the floor. I just waited, facing the street, looking outside the doors, enjoying the presence of God's love and peace. But I was aware that something was coming next. Then He came. Up the flight of cement stairs and through the main doors that were open to the night came a very striking figure. His face was red and aloof, deeply creased as if he had been somewhere very hot for a long time. He tried to act as if he did not see me and passed me on my left a good distance from me. He could not break past the plane of power that apparently blocked him on my left. Seemingly interrupted and muttering, but still determined not to be distracted, he went around in front of me, not looking at me, and tried again on my right, but was unable to gain entrance into the area of worship. It was then that he made his way back to the main entrance doors, where I had not moved, and he squared off in front of me about 8 feet away. He lowered his fierce brow and burst into the worst string of profanity and name-calling that I had ever heard. I began then to become personally angry at this hellion. I did not lose the strong feeling of love and peace, nor did I feel unsettled. I began to feel indignation and was aware that my feet were beginning to come closer to the floor. In the incremental process of making contact with the floor, the intensity of power was growing exponentially all around me, above me, beneath me, and within me. The power of God's Spirit was accumulating, and when at last my feet touched the foyer floor, at that instant I opened my mouth and spoke words, and the words and Spirit were energized together in a mighty rushing current. In a tangible way, I could feel the power in the area from underneath my nose down to my navel, traveling out from around and within me as if I were a supercharged laser. The current hit him with great force and drove him backward out through the doors into the dark of night. After that, I just looked out the doors, waiting, feeling the love and peace that had never left, savoring the moment of amazing power that had just flowed through me, aware that it was the power of God. I then walked out the main doors into the night, down the stairs and onto the sidewalk. I began to rise up, and just as I had felt an incremental and exponential power accumulate as I had moved down toward the foyer floor, that power of accumulating righteous indignation, this time I felt an incremental increase of love and peace. The love and peace became so overwhelming as I moved upward that I could not hold back my tears. I did not see Jesus, but I knew that he was up in the heaven and he missed me. He was missing me, and he loved me more than I could understand. So great was this feeling of love and peace that I knew that he truly was waiting for me and longed for me urgently. He missed me as a dear friend. As I moved toward him, the love and peace intensified until I was out of breath, and gathering my breath, I began to whisper his name. I was unaware, lost in that wonderful feeling of his presence and thinking about him, that I had been traveling back home. Then I was aware of passing back through my ceiling, settling back into my bed, the misty aura of the Spirit all around me, gently placing me next to my wife on my left. I tried to wake her with my voice, but could not frame any words. When I was completely settled, I noticed the Spirit was beginning to rise up out of me and from around me, and I wanted my wife to see. I just barely framed a whisper and whispered her name, weeping, just about breathlessly. She stirred, but never woke to see the Spirit aura.